What do you make of Ron Paul now, the man? Because it's interesting. You described him as a kook, and he has a funny way of speaking, and now he does these commercials about that it seems like he's trying to make a quick buck or something. I really like him. I really like Rand Paul. I'm trying to get both of them on the show. Hopefully it'll happen. During the Republican debates, the whole time I was looking at Rand Paul, going, "This is the one sane guy up here," and of course he was the first one to drop out.
Right.
What do you make of the Ron Paul movement? Because he really was the first, I guess you could say Ross Perot was the first kind of real outsider shaking things up back in '92. But Ron Paul 8 years ago, it had some of the Trump feel to it in terms of outsider stuff.
Well, I think, I don't know Ron personally, so I can't speak to who he is as a man. I have noticed the commercials and things too, and all I can say about that is I can't fault the guy for wanting to make a dollar. And if he really believes that we're about to see a major market collapse and that you need to own gold or whatever, then I have no problem with a guy going out there and selling his brand, because that's really what he's selling in order to try and move product. That to me is a capitalist idea. And I do think that he has been instrumental in helping the current liberty movement get to where it is today. I was watching an interview from Reason magazine with Jeffrey Tucker, and he said, Jeffrey was trying to figure out how he was going to write, I think at FEE, and he was discussing it. And he said, I went back and read a lot of the old writings from the libertarians in the 1960s and on back. He said, because back then there was no movement. And right now, we all kind of have our own verbiage and language that we talk in. And it's almost like a club, where if you understand the nap, then you have an inside track on what everybody's talking about. And if you don't, then you're outside of that. And he said, I started writing and trying to write for the common person who didn't have that vocabulary. And I think what Ron did was, he helped bring those ideas to light, and it turned out that there was a huge group of people who felt the same way and were looking for that voice. And I think had Rand decided, I question whether Rand really wanted to run for president or if he wanted to raise money for his Senate campaign. But I think if Rand had really wanted to run for president and had ran on a close platform that his father ran on, that he would have done very well.
So is that, more than anything else, the reason that we need a strong Libertarian Party, and probably some other parties as well? Because when I was watching Rand up there, the things that he was talking about had very little to do with the modern day Republican Party. When he was talking about freedom, when he was talking about NSA stuff, all the stuff that now about the CIA and all this other stuff that's now coming out left and right, and he was filibustering it even before he was running for president. And when, there were things though that I thought he missed the boat on. So something like gay marriage, which I think he should have been out in front of. And he sort of hedged his bets. I did a video on it a couple of years ago where he kind of was like, I'm for freedom, but I kind of don't like he just kind of wouldn't quite. He wouldn't go all the way.
It was a lose. It was probably a loser back then, and over the last several years, it really has become kind of mainstream ideas that now it's socially acceptable for even the right to hold a view that says, hey, you've got a right to love who you want to love and spend your time with who you want to spend your time with, marry who you want to marry. But I think back then it really was. I agree with you, but at the same time, I gotta have.
Yeah, he was playing politics. I get it.
Yeah, it's just so hard because you're like, I didn't agree with everything I agree with, so now I have to, be upset with him, and I'm just not that way.
I'm not upset with him. I just thought it was an interesting place that he had to be in, because you could see that he was trying to win the nomination of a party that happened to be the closest to his principles, but that's only because we have two parties. And I think he even had that look on his face, that sort of exasperated, like, I can't believe I'm standing here with these guys. Look, and then. I mean, literally, I think he was out after the straw poll, or whatever the first thing was.
But to answer your question about the Libertarian Party, I would love to see more parties. I would love to. There's now a capitalist party and a Constitution party. There's a Green Party as well as. I wish all of them had the opportunity to be on a ballot. I think the organizational structure is designed to ensure that there's only two parties, that there's only two teams. Because you start liquidating teams and people start going other places, the odds of these two teams maintaining power becomes almost impossible. But the Libertarian Party is wrecked, just absolutely wrecked. It's a nightmare. There are good people inside the Libertarian Party who are trying to do the right thing. But the party is absolutely in shambles, in my opinion. So much so that I'm still a registered Republican. I would change party affiliations if I felt like it mattered. It just really doesn't.
Yeah.
The one time
Do you do that because of closed primaries?
Yes, in Kansas, at least when last time I checked, it was still a closed primary.
Yeah.
And so I can affect more change, I think, with the Republican Party than I could as a Libertarian.
Yeah. That's why I'm a registered Democrat.
Yeah.
And at this point, I could just as easily be a registered Republican.
Yeah.
It wouldn't affect my vote. It would have something to do with the primaries.
So one of the things with the Libertarian Party having not much money and not a lot of, really not doing a very good job, because look, they've been around for 40 years. They're still in the best year that they had, which was this last cycle, when they had a prime opportunity to just suck people away. 3% is what they managed to do. They managed to get the most lukewarm, painful candidate that they could find.
Again, I want to state for the record, I like Gary Johnson as a man. He's been on my show. I've chatted with him privately. I'd love to have dinner with him.
I don't know Gary Johnson the man, but Gary Johnson the politician is wrecked. Wrecked.
No, he was terrible. There were so many moments of terror. But how much of that even shows you how much power the media and the two parties have over us? Because the only time Gary Johnson could even get in the news was Aleppo or his little tongue.
Well, listen now, hang on.
But all of those things, but that was the only time they cared about him, was when they mocked him. So if he would have stood up there, laid out what liberty is, laid out what states' rights are, laid out separation of powers, all of the things that you love, the media would have absolutely ignored him. So in a way, he almost had to be a clown. I'm playing a little devil's advocate here.
Why did the Aleppo thing happen? He was on MSNBC. MSNBC gave him airtime, and he screwed that up. He was being interviewed later on and ended up getting in a fight with some interviewer and just really losing his cool.
Yeah.
And before that, it was something else about baking the cake during the primary season, and he was aggravating libertarians. I mean, the man you couldn't put him in. He needed to be in front of microphones, and because he was the candidate in a year when people cared about third parties, he was getting all the airtime he needed to win massive votes and bring people over to the Libertarian Party. And what he did was just wrecked it. Yeah. And he did 3%, and I even wrote a deal about halfway through the election. I said the worst thing that could possibly happen is that Gary Johnson does 3 to 5%. Because what's going to happen is the Libertarian Party is going to turn around and say, see, we did better this year than we did. 1% is all we've been able to do. We got 3 to 5%. This is why we're on the right track with guys like Gary Johnson and Bill Weld. And sure enough, names that are being floated for 2020, Bill Weld is one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't. Bill Weld seems like a very decent, principled guy, but the guy couldn't, excite something. I can't think of the right analogy.
He's not libertarian for one thing,
right?
And he's absolutely not going to win anybody over.
So who should grab it then? If you're looking at this thing wide open and you thought, all right, if Trump makes it 4 years without getting impeached, which I think is the Democrats' goal, I think that's pretty clear. They're going to try to figure out how to impeach him one way or another, and we get just the same old thing out of the Democrats. Who's the guy then? Is it Rand or is there someone else? I think it has to be someone that's going to play the game completely differently.
Well, I think Rand he's not going to do it because he's a Republican, and he's not going to leave his party and go back down to AAA with the Libertarians to play ball there. And
unless he gets a little kookier as he gets older, like his
dad.
That would be the only way. But I don't see it either.
I think there are great people in the Republican Party who are very liberty-minded. You've got guys like Mike Lee and Justin Amage. You have Rand Paul, of course, and Thomas Massey is another great one, who are really trying to follow the principles that you and I believe in, and they'll vote that way when the time comes. They put their reputation to their vote. But in terms of who should run in 2020 for the Libertarian Party, that hasn't even entered my mind because I don't think it will matter. I think they're going to go right back down to 1%, 0.5% of the vote, because they had their chance. Their chance was 2016, 17, and they've squandered it.
Okay, so then if that's the case, which out of the two parties right now is more liberty-minded to you? Because I sense total exasperation with both, but I suspect you'd... Well, I don't want to lead on you.
You have more, from what I have seen, you have more Republicans in the Liberty Caucus and some of those places that have the right ideas. The left, unfortunately, has gone way off, in my opinion, just kind of gone way off the deep end. I think you kind of feel the same way from what I've seen from you, is that it's gone so far away, it's gone to authoritarianism. I think you call it the regressive left. And unfortunately, I think that's not a minority. I don't think it's a fringe. For a while, it was a small group making a lot of noise. And I think now it's a lot of people making a lot of noise. It's the bulk, not the majority, not the minority.
Yeah, so let's do a little buzzword bingo now, because now that you mentioned the regressive left and some of the things that I talk about. So I'm sitting here, I don't know how long we've been going, probably about a half hour or so, and I basically agree with everything you said. So people will say to me, Dave, you're really a libertarian. You're not a classical liberal, you're a libertarian. Now I get it. We don't have to get hung up on the words. Right. For people like us that interview people, that talk about these things, sometimes you need some labels, otherwise people don't know what the hell you're talking
absolutely.
about. But without getting hung up on the words, what do you see as the difference between a classical liberal and a libertarian? Or do you see it?
I don't know. I think they're so close together that we ought to just be on the same team. There are probably some things like, for example, there are lots of, you have classical liberalism, libertarianism, and anarcho-capitalism that probably are kind of the three. Libertarian being in the middle, anarcho-capitalists, and then classical liberals. You probably would be in favor of a little more government than I would be.
Yeah.
But the differences would be so minute that they're not even worth fighting about. I always say, look, I have 5 principles that I base both my personal belief and my show about. Limited government, individualism, peace, tolerance, and free markets. Those are the things that I believe in. And everything that we do and I talk about is viewed through that prism. How do we create more peace, more tolerance, smaller government, and freer markets, and more individualism in our daily lives? Because I have found that as those things increase, wealth and prosperity for everyone, from people at the bottom to the people at the top, everybody goes up, all ships rise. By that contrast, as we get more government, as peace becomes less frequent and war more frequent, as we become more intolerant and we focus less on the individual and more on the collective, everyone's standard of living goes down. And this is true across the board. Now, you can look at places like Denmark and Sweden and say, well, they've got better, more socialist policies and they're still doing fine, and that's okay. But what we see is, as we turn towards the direction of statism, we see less opportunity, less wealth, and less prosperity. As we turn towards liberty, the exact opposite happens.
Yeah, isn't that that analogy, the Denmark and Sweden thing, which I hear people say all the time, it also doesn't quite work because they're mostly homogeneous societies, and we have a melting pot of everybody here. So the more the left tries to use identity politics, well, we have all kinds of different people here. It's a very easy tool, right, to get people to start hating each other and play this nonsensical oppression Olympics, versus over there where they don't have that many groups to pit against each other. They actually have some problems now, but historically they have.
I think identity politics has been incredibly successful at driving a wedge between Americans and getting them to fight between one another instead of the real culprit, which is your government that's really wronging you. You know, for so long, the Christian conservatives and the gay rights groups just fought each other tooth and nail. Something that I'm sure we were on opposite sides of that at one point in time in our lives, I'm sure. And what you realize is hey, there's nothing here for us to really argue about. You live your life the way you choose. I'll live my life the way I choose. And as long as we're not trying to force the other person to accept us, we're fine.
Yeah, which is both liberal and libertarian at the same time.
That's exactly right. Look,
yeah.
See, here's the thing: is that I don't have to like you. I don't have to agree with you. But we can still live in society together. The difference is I don't have a right to force you to accept my way of looking at things.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately where we've come in society. You see it at colleges now, where it's not enough. Tolerance to them is you finally come around and agree with me and accept that I'm right.
Right.
That's tolerance.
Then I'll be tolerant of your stupid beliefs that you had before you accepted.
That's exactly right. Then I'll be tolerant of where you were.
Right.
And that's not tolerance. Tolerance is, hey, we fundamentally disagree on something, but hey, look, if you want to, I use drug use, right? I'm in favor of the legalization of virtually every drug known to man. That does not mean that I think you should be shooting heroin. And if that is the way you choose to live your life, I'm fine with you spending your money that way and investing your life that way. But if you ask me, I'm going to try and convince you not to do that.
Yeah.
Because I don't agree with your lifestyle.
Yeah. For the record, that might be a place where I think I'm a little more for the state.
Okay.
I'm not fully there on legalizing everything. There's certain things that I would definitely want to legalize, and I get the principle that you're guiding that on, but I don't think I'm quite there on the full legalization of everything.
And what I would say to anybody who has that, who come to me and say that, I say, okay, well, let's find the things that you and I do agree on. We'll fight that battle together.
Yeah.
And then we'll separate where we need to separate. But there's no reason we can't be friends and work together on the things that we agree on. I mean, even Bernie Sanders, who's in favor of you being able to buy cheaper drugs from Canada. Man, that's a great plan. Sign me up. That's free markets. I don't care that the reason he wants to do it is different than mine, that the goals he's trying to achieve are different. I just care about free markets.
Yeah, somebody getting the cheapest
That's
drug
right.
to care about their health however they want,
We
which
don't-
is, I always think, is the craziest thing, that Republicans and conservatives haven't been 100% for medicinal marijuana, at least forgetting recreational for a second, that why shouldn't you have access to anything that could alleviate your suffering if you had some sort of disease? This seems like the most liberty-based idea you could possibly have.
Absolutely. Even things like all the drug trials. You have people who are dying, who are literally months away from their life ending, and there are potentially drugs on the market at some stage of development that might be able to help them. You should be able to stand up as an American and say, hey, I want to be on that. If they want to give that to me, stop giving it to monkeys and give it to me. It might save my life. It might kill me quicker, but I'm willing to accept that responsibility.
But
it's
it would
my
be
life.
my
my
choice.
choice.
You know, just jumping back to something that you just said about the gay movement and the Christian conservatives, I think it's really interesting also the way tolerance works, because to me, Christian conservatives have evolved on this tremendously. There is virtually no fight against gay marriage anymore. And especially now that Trump is president, he's pretty much shut the Republicans down on this. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't exist. And I get a ton of email from Christian conservatives saying, you know, Dave, I never saw a liberal or a gay before that I thought I could agree with on some of this stuff. But my feeling is that they saw some change happen, the world didn't end, and it's basically been accepted. And we have to acknowledge that. We have to stop hating, which I see nobody on the left doing. Still, there's just a tremendous amount of hate to middle America Christian conservatives. And I think that's just, it's so unfortunate and short-sighted. They evolved into what you wanted. Doesn't mean they agree with you on everything else, but now how about a moment of, oh,
it's
that's
funny.
nice.
I was in my church and I brought up the issue when they were talking about it in a class that I was in, and I was really worried that I was going to open up a huge can of worms. And I actually sat on the board of this church, so that was even a little more uncomfortable for me. And I was shocked at at the response that I got. That people said, you know what, he's right, because my premise was, look, we have something that we believe in. We have a faith that we follow. And our ability to follow the faith the way that we want to it requires freedom. And that freedom extends to other people who disagree with us, who have different ideas than we do. And I don't know if it was the way I explained it or just the fact that it's become become a more acceptable lifestyle choice. Everyone was in general agreement with it. And that's just, I think that's what's critical, is that people understand that liberty doesn't mean that we have to accept other ideas. It just means we have to allow people to make their own choices.
Yeah, better than bludgeoning people to death
Much
while they're
better than
mildly disagreeing
Yes,
with you, right?
exactly.
So let's talk about some of the government stuff, because this little difference between maybe a classical liberal and a libertarian.
Okay.
So what can government do in your view? I mean, do you want everything privatized? Like, the government now sends a garbage truck to my house on Thursdays. They pick up the garbage. They do a pretty decent job of it.
Yeah.
Is that okay for the government to do?
I think that's an acceptable thing for government to do if that's what an individual wants. Government, I believe that government exists to do three things: to protect life, liberty, and property. And I think that beyond that, the government has no business doing anything else. If it does want to engage in one of those activities, it cannot be a monopoly. So if the government wants to run the garbage business, for example, it needs to compete with all of the other garbage providers on the market. It doesn't have the right to say we're going to have 3 garbage providers and no more, because 3 is the maximum. It has a responsibility to ensure that if garbage pickup companies enter the market, that there is a level playing field, that garbage man A, who owns his company, doesn't try and beat up or destroy the property of the new one, or that that laws aren't created in order to prevent certain people from coming into the market. Unfortunately, what our government does is, even in areas where it doesn't have a role to play, it ends up exerting its influence through regulation and through what I call removing rungs on the ladder to success, making it more difficult for people to come into a market when their goal or their job is to make sure that it's easier, or that as easy as possible.
Yeah, so in the case of the garbage, like here in LA where we love, we have our green garbage cans outside, we got our blue ones for recycling, we got our black ones, there's probably 3 others that are color-coded in some way whatsoever. Your argument isn't that this inherently is not working. It's that most likely, if there was more competition, there would be somebody that would figure out how to do it cheaper, more people would be rewarded in their work because they're not just doing government jobs, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's not inherently that this situation is, like, this situation's working for me. It works, they're consistent, they're good, I throw a lot of crap out, it all gets taken care of. But that if private companies could get in on this, it actually probably would lower costs and put more in my pocket.
I don't know how it is in LA. In Kansas, where I live, in Kansas City, there is a third-party waste management provider that the city contracts with. So the city doesn't actually do it itself. It contracts with the company.
It may be the same here.
Okay, right. But that's irrelevant, because what's happening is the government is deciding who's going to be, and they're negotiating the contract. And there's, other than the bidding process, which we all know is somewhat of a sham,
right?
There's only one provider. There's no competition.
So in effect, it's the same thing, even if they're not running the company.
So it's the same thing. And so my argument is, government does almost nothing as efficiently as a free market would do it. And therefore, what you ought to do is you ought to try and find a free market solution whenever it's possible. And there are areas, I will be frank with you, there are areas or I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you provide for national defense without a tax, because I happen to believe that taxation is theft. I think that if you compel someone...
I was getting there.
I think if you compel someone to act and you deprive someone of their justly earned property without their permission, that's theft. If I can't do it to you, the government can't do it to you on my behalf. And so my personal opinion on this type of stuff is that you have to have a free market solution for it. But when the case of a military, how do you do it? Now, people will come up with all kinds of ways. Oh, we can do it with a lottery. We can do it with this and that. But that's all speculation. I don't know if it would work or not.
Yeah.
But I think that we have a responsibility to try to eliminate taxation and to provide a free market as possible.
Yeah, so this, I think, is somewhere where I'm probably a little more big government than you, because I see that, I just don't see how it could be done without taxes. And also, I almost think that we're sort of in too deep with some of this stuff. Like, even if you could get me there on all the principles, right? And I was like, all right, clean, I got it. That we have a military that's funded a certain way. Our roads now are funded a certain way. That doesn't mean we couldn't have privately funded roads, and I think eventually we'll have some like that, or privately funded state parks and things of that nature. But that we're in so deep that to unfurl all that would really be like an unfurling of everything that we've got here.
You might be right. This is what I would say, is that I think that you and I, if we sat here and talked about it long enough, that I could get you to the principled position that says, yes, if I deprive you of something that you earned, that if I see, libertarianism or liberty starts with the understanding of self-ownership, that I own myself. And in order for that to have any value, I also have to own the byproduct of what I create. So my store of knowledge and skills, if I create the table, I own the table. It's a byproduct of what I generated with my labor. Right? So for the government to come in and say, well, because you were born here, or because we've decided to create it, 20% of that table belongs to us, is theft. I couldn't come to your house and say, you know, this is a beautiful studio. I wish I had some of this stuff. So I'm going to take 20% of this.
Yeah,
because
you take one bottle of booze.
Yeah, thanks, man. Because this is beautiful. I'd go to jail for that. our government is derived from the consent of the governed.
Yeah.
If I don't have the right to do it, then I don't have a right to compel the government to do it on your behalf. So once we come to that agreement that it's theft, then taxation is theft. Anything beyond that is just an excuse as to why we can't figure out how to make it work. So I run from the principled position that simply says taxation is theft. Therefore, we should make every attempt to try and limit it as much as possible. Now, like I said, I don't know what that means.
Right.
So can we eliminate the DMV? Can we eliminate private roads? Because a lot of people think things like driver's license. You hear libertarians argue about the stupidest things.
Guys.
I talked about this on my show the other day. I said, think about it for a moment. Let's say I owned a private road, and I've got people driving on that road. Don't you think I would want to ensure that somebody driving on my road had some sort of standard and had received some sort of training before they get out there, so I don't catch a lawsuit, or my road's not clogged up all the time with drivers who can't drive? Of course I would. So some of this stuff that these libertarians cry about all day long is stuff we would likely have in a free market system anyway.
By the way, liberals cry about that too, because this is one of the things where I really disagree with Bill Maher, who is one of my heroes, who I love and I hope will be sitting in that chair at some point, is that I saw him talking about Trump's pick for the EPA. Now it sounds like there's some really confusing stuff with climate change and a bunch of other things, but he immediately, his comment was, well, now the companies can dump in the river again. And it's like, we live in a time where no company, yes, somebody might dump in the river again if we took away the regulation. But everyone is on Snapchat and Twitter and social media campaigns, and no sensible company that wanted to make money would be dumping in the river, forgetting that they would be polluting their own water and all that. We know companies sometimes don't care about that kind of stuff. But just that we would regulate ourselves, I think is an important principle that we've forgotten.
I think in order for liberty to work right, because you make some important points about the EPA. So let's say you've got a huge company that makes billions of dollars a year, and they decide, cost-benefit analysis, it is better for us to dump into the river, and we'll just take somebody to court.
Yeah.
The guy who lives downstream, who owns 100 acres, who runs his cattle on there, he doesn't have the money to defend against a lawsuit because the drinking water that kills his cattle is now polluted. And so we have a problem in America. In order for liberty to work right, government has to do those three things correctly: life, liberty, and property. That means you have to be able to have a means to seek a redress of grievances that's simple and straightforward. And right now we don't have that. The lawyers and the government have convoluted the legal system to a point where if you don't have millions of dollars, there's no chance that you could defend yourself or bring a suit against one of these large corporations, because they have 10 years and $1 billion to spend against you. So many of this, it's layers of correction that's going to have to happen.
Yeah, I love that you brought it. I think that example is perfect, because if you tear back all of this, some company might do exactly what you said, and now this guy is stuck in legal fees for the rest of his life. His cattle die, his farm closes, and that's that. And so you need some other piece to this. Either you would need a reformation of our legal process at the same time as you were doing all this.
That's right. And so I don't ignore the problems that we have, and because what you hear from a lot of libertarians is, well, here's the solution. The EPA has never worked. It doesn't do anything right. It can't do anything good, and it may do a lot of things good. The government probably does several good things. The question, the complaint I make is they do it less efficiently than someone else would probably do it, and they're doing it with stolen money. So it doesn't really matter to me what good you do with the money after you've taken it. It's still theft, and we still need to find a better solution. And I think the free market is very good at coming up with these things on its own when you unleash that opportunity. Yeah. So, but we, like you said, we have decades, if not 100 years of really bad policy that's just layered on top of each other.
Yeah. So if you could never convince the entire country to say taxation is theft, which I still think is a bridge too far for probably 90% of people, I think it is, even though I fully understand the principles that you're laying out here. Would you be for some intermediate steps, that something like a flat tax? I think I've basically come around on that you could probably tax everyone's 12 to 15%. If you make under 50,000 or whatever, some low number, you don't get taxed anything. And then I think you actually could, at $5 million you could pay another percent more, and above 20 million you could pay 2%. I don't know. Something that basically 99% of us would pay the exact same thing, and it would be less than we're paying now, and government would have to tighten its belt. Like, would you see something like that as some sort of intermediate step?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is the way I try and explain it to people, is that I'm on a bus, and my bus only goes one direction. It goes closer towards those 5 principles that I talked about. And if you're willing to come with me on that, we're going. But we're not detouring. We're not taking 2 steps back or going a little to the left and we're stopping off at the Quick Trip to pick up snacks. None of that. We're beelining towards a country that has a smaller government, more peace, more tolerance, individual liberty, and freer markets.
But right? I got a communist friend who has a gas station. They're giving away gas for free. Right? Can we just stop there for a second?
No, we can't do that. But you're welcome to get off the bus if that's where you want to stop, right?
Fair enough.
So if there's somebody who says, hey, I'm not going to go all the way with you, but I'm willing to support a flat tax or a consumption tax or something like that, that in the end would produce a lower tax burden for the vast majority of people and would keep more money in the economy, I'm all for it. Where do I sign up for that? I will support you in that effort. Now, once we've done that, I will continue to fight for more, but I'm happy to support anything that takes us closer towards those principles I talked about.
Yeah, I'm curious, do you consider yourself an objectivist in any way? Because almost everything that you've said here, when I've had Yaron Brook, who is at the time was the president of the Ayn Rand Foundation, and Mark Pellegrino is an actor who's a big objectivist, and I had Don Watkins on a couple months ago. They're laying out there's very, very similar things that they're laying out.
I've never considered myself an objectivist. I just look at the world and I say, here's the thing, I don't want to sit in a vacuum on my show and talk to a bunch of yes men who shake their heads yes, and then we need to do something. Yeah, he's right. Yeah, this government's terrible. I want to be able to take qualified steps towards achieving the ideas that I believe in. And so a big part of my show is about reiterating that to the people who are listening. Education, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, is critical. You have to educate people. They have to understand, because they're not learning it in school. And so as that education process takes place, my show fills a vacuum there. We take current events, we talk about them, and then I express to my audience, your job is not to come here and listen. Your job is to come here and explain and take it and share with others.
Yeah. When are you going to run for president?
Never.
Why not?
I don't.
I mean, you look the part, you know what you're saying.
Here's I made this joke and I said, well, when someone gives me $1 million, just shows up with $1 million to let me run a primary, then I'll run. And I said it as a joke until somebody called me and said they would give me the money. And then I said, well, wait a minute.
Really? I'll take that guy's number.
Yeah. He said, I think you can do it. And he said, I can get the money for you. And I didn't believe him at first, but then after our talk, I realized that yes, he really could get the money for me.
Yeah.
And then we started talking about it, and I think I can do far more good outside of Washington than I could within it. Right now, all of my strength comes from the fact that I attack both political parties. You couldn't do that, or all political parties really, and I hold their feet to the fire. I don't think I could do that and get elected as a Republican or as a Democrat, or certainly not as a Libertarian from what I know of the Libertarian Party now.
Right.
So I'm caught in this space where I can't really speak my mind and tell the truth and run for public office.
So then what does that say, and this is how we'll sort of wrap up. I mean, I've had several guests that I've sat across from here that I've thought this is the type of person that should run for something. I've had Ben Shapiro. You would probably disagree with him on a whole bunch of, he would be for
Ben's a good guy, though.
Bigger state things,
yeah.
and I think you'd agree on a lot of libertarian stuff or whatever. But like, he strikes me as someone that is principled, that I have certain political disagreements with. But I sense that a lot of people, a lot of principled, decent people would say exactly what you said there, which would be, I wouldn't be able to tell the truth, and they'd add that the cost and the politics of destruction and all of that stuff, that why would any sane person want to be part of that?
Well, I was having a conversation this weekend down in San Diego with a friend of mine, and he said the reason that Washington is the way it is because guys like you won't run. And I think that's probably part of it. And unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for that, or why I won't fall on the sword and go work for a corrupt institution on behalf of the people. But I don't think right now you're going to get anything done. I think that these guys who are doing the right thing, guys like Rand, are on their own. They can't fight the power inside of their own political party.
Yeah.
Much less the other side. We're headed in the wrong direction. We're losing the war, and unless something dramatic changes, and right now I think it's education. I think people need to tie the way their current life is and what's happening in the world with the decisions that government is making, and how making different choices would produce different results. Without that, we're not going to have any success.
Yeah, well, you know what? As I say at the end of the good ones, I didn't have to look down once, so there you go. I'm going to register JasonStapleton2020.com just in case.
All right.
And then you'll give me the number of that guy, and then I'd sell it back to you, because that would be a wonderful exchange of capitalism.
Sounds
Wouldn't
good.
you see, where everyone wins. All right, well, it was a pleasure talking to you. And for more on Jason, check out his show at JasonStapleton.com.